Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at adding cross-tenant role assignments for managed identity in Azure Managed Application. So just to recap, in the previous video we looked at how we run into problems where we try to access storage using this identity because it only had owner permission from our template on purpose, and we wanted to have storage data, storage blob data contributor or reader permission, and we could not assign it from the customer side because of the deny assignments on the resource group, and we couldn't assign it from the publisher side because the Active Directory that's used to feed these assignment options doesn't show us the ID of the managed identity. So we would think maybe we can do it through command line, right? So we would log in as the publisher, select the end customer subscription, and we can see the resource groups that the publisher has access to inside of that subscription. And maybe we can use the Azure role assignment create command, pass the object ID of the managed identity, pass the assignee principal type set to the service principal, pass the right resource group, pass the right scope, and assign the right role, right, to this through the role assignment. Let's see if this works, and then we'll discuss why it does or doesn't work. So let's take a look. Let's try this role assignment create command. First, we'll try it with assignee, and then later with assignee object ID and see how it behaves, okay? So here I created a tiny command, role assignment create. For role name, if we pass the name here, by the way, this will make an extra call to resolve this name to a well-known GUID. So what I like to do just to avoid these calls is just look up the Azure built-in roles, storage, blob, data, contributor, let's say. And then inside of the storage, blob, data contributor, we have a well-known GUID for it. So let's use this GUID instead of the name, because at the end this call anyways makes it. For assignee, we will attach the assignee value over here to be the managed identity principal ID. So we're grabbing it from here, I think BF8. Let's see if it matches what I typed here, right there, great. For the scope, we'll assign it to the storage account, okay? So let's see, as a publisher, who has owner permissions on this customer's managed resource group, can I do this role assignment using this assignee? The hint is it will not work. Let's see why it will not work. So if I run this command as a publisher, we're getting back a response that says that the service principal could not be found in a graph database. And this makes sense because that's the same thing we saw in the UI when we try to assign permissions to this assignee, the customer's identity is not in the Azure Active Directory tenant of the publisher, and this is where it's trying to find it. So is there something we can do? Well, based on this, it sounds like we can try to pass the object ID instead of the assignee to bypass graph permission issues. So let's just see if that works. So inside of this command then, so we tried this command, we're going to again use this role ID. And for the object ID approach, we are now, instead of using the principal ID right here, we are going to use the object ID of the identity. We're going to say it's a service principal, and we're going to assign it to this scope. So this is supposed to bypass the check of this in the graph database where it's not finding it. So let's see if this role assignment will help us do what we need. So will this command succeed? So based on the output here, it looks like the command succeeded. Look at that. It seemed to have created something. So let's see if it actually worked. So let's go on the customer side and see for this storage account on the customer side if we see that role assignment. We expect to see storage blob contributor for this identity, and we don't see it, right? We see all these other ones, but we don't see it. Okay, interesting. What about on the publisher side, right? So again, we're going to go to the storage account, role assignments. Notice something did get created, but it does not look promising because it says identity not found and unable to find identity. So we created a role assignment to some object ID, but this identity is not going to work for us in this way. So this is an explanation of why using the regular command Azure role assignment create role, no matter which parameters we pass to it, in the current version of this command, we cannot create a cross-tenant assignment. That's what we need to do. We need to create an assignment using publishers' login credentials, but we need that assignment to appear inside of the customer's subscription. So how can we do it instead? So inside of the JSON template, that is part of this repo that will be linked right here, managed identity role assignment. There's a small workaround that we can try. We basically have a tiny template that takes principal ID, principal type, very similar to the command we just executed, role definition ID, okay, scope, and then one more field that we spoke about during the template discussions related to the delegated managed identity. So this parameter right here that is being set right over here is the trick, together with this API version, that we can use from the publisher side to assign roles across tenants. Okay, so we will gonna give it a shot right now and see if it works instead of using the Azure CLI. I'm assuming that in the future versions of Azure CLI, it may expose this as optional property so that we can do it directly from the CLI command versus doing it through the template. So number one step, let's go and remove the invalid assignment. Okay. And then let's construct the proper command for calling this. So looking back at this repo with some snippets, we're going to take this command that executes the template, and we're going to modify the parameters basically to do what we need, right? So here's how I constructed it. AZ group deployment create, the resource group where our identity is located and storage account is located, the template that we will be using for the assignment. For parameters, we're going to pass the principal ID of the managed identity, saying it that service principal. We're going to pass the role definition, which will basically be in this format over here is that GUID, well-known GUID of the built-in role that we discussed right here for storage, for this storage data contributor role. The scope will be the storage account. And then this parameter to the template, delegated managed identity, will be the resource ID of the managed identity that represents this principle right here, okay? So let's take a look if this command works for us successfully and also appears successfully inside. So we're running it under permissions of the publisher. So when we run the command as is, we get an error message that's saying that the scope does not match the role assignment of the URL where we're making the request. And this is because in this template, as an example, this template is only for cases where the assignment is at the resource group level. So what we can do just very simply is let's remove this part of the scope and assign the role at the resource group level. If we wanted to do it at the resource level, we would need to make a slight change to this the template. This type definition would not be role assignment, Rather, what we would need to do is we would need to use a different pattern, right? Over here, it's at resource scope. We would need to use the type to be resource provider name, resource type, providers role assignments, and then the name would need to be the name. So the name would be very similar, except there would need to be this nesting, and resource provider type would need to be different. So instead of making the changes to the template, let's just make the changes to the command scope so it aligns. So instead of assigning it at the scope of the actual resource, let's assign it at the resource group level. So if there were multiple storage accounts, they would all be using the same permission, just as an example, right? For your specific scenarios, you would obviously be able to modify the managed identity role assignment resource group and use the proper type and proper name. Right now, this name and type are only going to work for resource group scope. Okay, so it's running. Okay, so it seems to have completed successfully. Let's now see how it looks. Let's go now from the customer side. So we're going to go not at the storage account, but let's say at the resource group level. Let's look at the access control and role assignments. And from the publisher level, we still see publisher clean permissions, the ones that are for the publisher group that can manage this offer. Let's look at the customer side. So on the customer side, at the resource group level, role assignments. So the command succeeded, and when we look at it, so we remember we use the client ID inside of that command. Right here, we created a role assignment, but something is looking strange based on what we just saw. So let's go back here, role assignments. And we're still seeing, now we're seeing it in the client side, identity not found, unable to find identity. So we must have used the wrong ID here in doing this assignment. It is appearing in the right tenant, it's appearing in the customer tenant, but we have a problem here. So let's see how we can delete this. Let's just delete it. And will this work? Nope, because as a customer, I have denied permission, so I cannot clean this error up. What about from the publisher side? I cannot delete it from the publisher side either because I don't even see that assignment. So how do we remove cross-tenant assignments? Let's say we made a mistake, like in this case. So looking at the repo here, a publisher can read and delete cross-tenant assignments using REST calls. So we're going to test this out. AZ REST get, and then we're going to give it the URL pointing to our resource group. And the key point here, why this works, is this magical parameter. We provide the tenant of the customer. So to see the role assignments in the customer tenant, we provide the tenant ID of the customer. Okay, so I will make a command right here that will let us see the assignments at the customer. So let's see what we got. The customer subscription, resource group, role assignments, and the tenant of the customer. And let's execute this command. AZ REST will actually use the permissions or the token of the logged in client. So let's see what we get back. So we got back a set of roles. Let's explore them and figure out which one is the wrong one. So we're seeing a role assignment, their names. This role assignment is assigned to the correct identity, it looks like, and this is the one that's assigned to the principal ID that's causing us problems. So it's this role assignment right here, that B298. The way we confirm it is over here. We see this was the role. So we need to get rid of this role assignment. And luckily, we can easily do that. We just need its name. And then we're going to use the delete command. We're going to point it to the specific name. add the tenant. Again, we just need to make sure we include the tenant. We're going to issue a delete call from the publisher side. Okay, so it confirmed that it deleted. Let's do a get again. You can see now it's only one role assignment. And let's refresh the resource group here, permissions, and we see that it cleaned up that incorrect assignment. So that's another important trick of how to do publisher read and delete cross-tenant access using this tenant ID of the customer, okay? Now, how do we fix and add it correctly? What was the mistake? The mistake was using the client ID instead of the object ID. So we used this client ID when creating the role assignment. We needed to use this object ID for the principal ID. So let's go and repeat this role assignment. So everything is identical. The only difference will be that right here, we'll put in the object ID and execute this command. Okay, seems like the command finished executing. Let's go and take a look from the customer side if we got the proper role assignment. And we see which looks to be promising. We have a storage blob data contributor assigned to the managed identity that we wanted to have. We did it again, just to recap, why did we do it in the managed resource group scope is because the sample template that I am using is assigning it at only, like it only works for resource group assignment. There is different naming convention for assigning it a specific resource, but can be easily extended to do that separately. So there's the assignment. And then hopefully now we will be able to confirm if we are able to read the storage because it should inherit this permission. So let's take a look. We can see the storage, it's inherited from the resource group scope. And what we learned so far are a few important things, and they're available here, how to read and delete cross-tenant assignments, and how to create cross-tenant assignments using the managed identity role assignment template. So the snippets of code are here in different contexts in this repo, but that's what we used to do some of these experiments. So now that we have the correct data plane permission assigned to our service principal, let's see if we can actually use it to access the storage that we were previously getting an error on, right? We previously were getting authorization permission mismatch error because we were missing the storage blob data role. We only had the owner role. So let's see if now, if we re-obtain the access token, if we are able to access storage correctly, just to confirm that what we did actually. So step one will be, let's get the access token. Let's make sure access token is available to us. Great. And let's see if we are able to make the curl request, parsing the access token. And we are basically using the ADLS Gen 2 API here. Right here is the ADLS endpoint name. And we're basically saying, hey, show us what's inside of this file system, okay? Boom. And we are able to get successfully the results back. It tells us that there is T1 CSV file there. Let's see if we can read the content. To see if we can read the content, we'll just do a read file directly on that file, simply like that. So let's just include this command and make sure we are pointing it to the right storage account. And let's see if we can see the contents of this file using this token. And we can. The file contains these lines. So just to wrap up, for this video, we looked at cross-tenant role assignment. So that we could fix ability to, from inside of the managed application, using a bearer token for accessing ADLS Gen 2 storage. Our template at deployment time was helpful in creating the owner access, but it didn't create the storage blob data contributor access. And therefore, we needed to manually edit. And we saw that to manually edit, we needed to use publisher credentials. And then using publisher credentials, we needed to use the managed identity role assignment template with a special delegated management identity resource ID. And then we also saw how we could get and delete incorrectly added permissions. That's it for this video. And in the following video, we'll take a look at one more wrinkle or complexity by using not the managed identity of the virtual machine where the pod is running, but we'll try to install the pod identity that's sometimes required for backup tools like Velero and others, and we'll try to use the pod identity from the pod running inside of AKS, inside of managed application, to access the storage account and see how we can do that. Thank you for watching.